The wind had teeth in Wyoming territory. It gnawed at the weathered boards of the cabin, finding every gap, every weakness, just as life had found hers. Abigail pressed her palm against the frosted window pane, watching the endless sweep of prairie grass bend and break under November's cruel hand. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay the town of Bitter Creek, but it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did her now. "Mama, I'm cold." Little Sarah's voice pulled Abigail from the window. Her daughter sat huddled near the dying embers of their morning fire, a threadbare quilt wrapped around her small shoulders. 5 years old, and already she knew not to complain too much, not to ask for what they didn't have. The sight of her pale cheeks, her father's stubborn chin made Abigail's chest tighten with a familiar ache. "I know, sweet pea. Mama's going to get more wood." Abigail pulled on Thomas's old coat. It hung loose on her frame, smelling faintly of tobacco and leather. Ghost scents of a man 15 months in the ground. She'd meant to take it to town, trade it for something that fit, but every time she reached for it, she remembered his hands on the buttons, his laugh when she'd tried it on as a joke. "You look like a scarecrow, Abby," he'd said, kissing her forehead. Now she was a scarecrow, trying to guard what was left of their dream. The woodpile behind the cabin had dwindled to almost nothing. Each piece she lifted felt heavier than the last, her hands raw despite the worn gloves. The axe leaned against the stump where Thomas had left it, the handle smooth from his grip. She'd tried splitting logs herself, but her aim was poor and her strength poorer. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, but neither could she afford to pay Jake Morrison to do it, not with what little money remained hidden in the coffee tin. As she gathered an armful of kindling, she surveyed their small holding. The chicken coop listed to one side, patched with whatever scraps she could find. Only 4 hens left now the coyotes had taken 2 last month. The barn, if it could be called that, sheltered their milk cow and the old plow horse that had seen better decades. Beyond that, 40 acres of stubbornness stretched toward the mountains, land that Thomas had sworn would make them rich with wheat and dreams. The first winter after his death, neighbors had come. Women from town with preserves and sympathy. Men offering to buy her out for pennies on the dollar. "A woman alone can't work this land," they'd said. Voices kind, but eyes calculating. "Think of your daughter." But thinking of Sarah was exactly why she'd stayed. This land was her inheritance, bought with her father's sweat and blood. Abigail would die before she let it go. Inside, she coaxed the fire back to life, feeding it carefully with the precious wood. Sarah had fallen asleep on the floor, curled like a cat in her nest of quilts. Abigail lifted her gently, carried her to the narrow bed they shared. The child stirred but didn't wake, her small hand clutching at her mother's sleeve. The cabin was one room, divided by a hanging blanket that separated their sleeping area from the main space. Thomas had promised to add on, to build Sarah her own room when she got bigger. Another promise the earth had swallowed. The walls were chinked with mud and straw, newspapers stuffed in the worst gaps. Harper's Weekly from 1871, advertisements for miracle tonics and mail-order brides. Sometimes Abigail read them by candlelight, wondering about the women desperate enough to answer those ads, to travel hundreds of miles to marry strangers. Then she'd look around her cabin, at the rifle by the door and the dwindling sack of flour, and understand desperation had many faces. She spent the afternoon mending Sarah's dress, torn at the hem from climbing after the chickens, her own stockings, more darn than original wool. Her mother's sewing basket sat beside her, the silver thimble worn smooth by 3 generations of women making do. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. Storm coming, she could smell it. The cow would need to be brought in close, the chicken secured. But first, the washing. She heated water on the stove, scrubbed their few clothes with lye soap that left her hands burning. Sarah helped, standing on a chair to reach the washboard, her small fingers working beside her mother's. They sang while they worked old songs Abigail's mother had taught her, songs about Ireland and green hills neither of them had ever seen. Why don't we have green hills, Mama? Sarah asked, wringing out a sock with determined concentration. Because we have gold ones, Abigail said, nodding toward the window where the prairie grass caught the late afternoon light. And purple mountains and skies bigger than anywhere else in the world. Bigger than heaven. Well, maybe not that big. Abigail smiled, the expression feeling rusty on her face. But close. As darkness crept across the prairie, she went out to tend the animals. The cow, Bessie, lowed mournfully as Abigail led her to the lean-to beside the cabin. The chickens were already roosting, feathers fluffed against the cold. She counted them twice, still 4. Small mercies. The plow horse, Moses, stood patient as death in his stall. 20 years old and showing it. But he was all they had to work the field come spring. If they made it to spring, Abigail pushed the thought away, focusing on the simple task of forking hay into his manger. Moses nudged her shoulder with his graying muzzle, and she leaned into his warmth for a moment, allowing herself that small comfort. By the time she finished, full dark had fallen. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees, and the first snowflakes were beginning to fall. She stood in the doorway of the barn, looking back at the cabin. One window glowed softly with lamplight. Sarah would be setting the table for supper. 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 forks, always 2, though Abigail's appetite had died with Thomas. The vastness of the prairie at night still took her breath away. In Boston, where she'd grown up, night meant street lamps and neighbors. The comfort of civilization pressed close. Here, darkness was absolute, broken only by stars that seemed both closer and more distant than they'd ever been in the city. She could walk for days in any direction and find nothing but grass and wind and the occasional homestead, equally isolated, equally stubborn. Thomas had loved it. "Look at all that freedom, Abby," he'd say, standing where she stood now. "A man can breathe out here." But he'd stopped breathing on a Tuesday morning in August, clutching his chest in the field, calling her name. She'd run, Sarah toddling behind, but by the time she reached him, his eyes were already seeing past the big sky into something bigger still. She shook off the memory and headed back to the cabin, securing the door with the heavy bar Thomas had installed. Inside, Sarah had indeed set the table, had even put out the good plates, the ones with tiny blue flowers that had survived the journey from Boston. "It's a party," Sarah announced. "For us." "What are we celebrating?" Abigail asked, warming her hands by the stove. "Being together," Sarah said simply, and Abigail had to turn away to hide the sudden tears. They ate beans and cornbread, same as yesterday, same as tomorrow. But Sarah chattered about the pictures she'd drawn with charcoal on precious paper, about the story the wind was telling, about the mouse she was certain lived under the stove and only came out at night to dance. Abigail listened, responded, marveled at the way children could find magic in the meanest circumstances. After supper, she read to Sarah from their one book, Pilgrim's Progress, pages worn soft as cloth. Sarah fell asleep halfway through, head on her mother's lap, breathing even and trusting. Abigail carried her to bed again, tucked the quilts tight around her, alone by the dying fire. Abigail allowed herself to count their resources. The coffee tin held $12.37. The root cellar had potatoes, some turnips, preserves from Summer's garden, flour enough for 2 weeks if she was careful. The chickens were laying, though less now with winter coming. Bessie still gave milk. They could make it to spring if nothing went wrong. If the chickens survived, if Moses stayed healthy, if she stayed healthy, if. She pulled Thomas's coat tighter around her shoulders and listened to the wind howl its lonely song across the prairie. Somewhere out there, wolves were hunting. Somewhere, other women were lying awake making the same calculations, fighting the same fears. The sisterhood of the stubborn, the foolish, the desperate. Tomorrow she'd need to patch the roof where the snow was coming in. Tomorrow she'd need to find a way to split more wood. Tomorrow she'd need to be stronger than she felt tonight. Always tomorrow, stretching out like the prairie itself, endless and unforgiving. But tonight, her daughter was fed and warm and sleeping safe. Tonight, they were together in their little cabin while the first storm of winter tested their walls. Tonight, that was enough. It had to be. The storm hit 3 days later like a freight train off its tracks. Abigail had seen blizzards before, but this was something else, a white wall of fury that swallowed the world whole. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed like a living thing, clawing at their cabin with fingers of ice and snow. She'd done what she could to prepare. Moses and Bessie were crammed together in the lean-to, the chickens locked tight in their coop with extra straw. Every gap in the cabin walls had been stuffed with fresh newspaper and rags. The woodpile, meager as it was, sat just outside the door under a canvas tarp. But as the storm intensified through the night, she knew it wouldn't be enough. Sarah slept fitfully, whimpering at each gust that shook their shelter. Abigail held her close, singing softly, though her voice was nearly lost in the wind's rage. The fire burned low. She didn't dare use too much wood, not knowing how long the storm would last. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, and snow sifted through cracks she hadn't even known existed. Then came the pounding. At first, she thought it was just the storm, a loose board, maybe, or a tree branch hitting the wall. But the rhythm was too regular, too insistent. Someone was at the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. No one should be out in this weather. No one could survive being out in this weather. The pounding came again, weaker this time. Abigail eased away from Sarah, who stirred but didn't wake. She reached for Thomas's rifle, checking that it was loaded. The weight of it felt wrong in her hands. She'd practiced shooting, but hitting a target in daylight was different from facing whatever was on the other side of that door in a blizzard. She approached slowly, rifle raised. "Who's there?" she called, but the wind ate her words. The pounding had stopped. Maybe whoever or whatever it was had given up, moved on. Then she heard it, a sound like something heavy sliding down the door. Every instinct told her to stay inside, to bar the door tighter and wait for morning. But another part of her, the part that still remembered Christian charity and human kindness, wouldn't let her, if someone was out there dying in the storm. She lifted the bar with one hand, keeping the rifle ready in the other. The wind nearly tore the door from its hinges when she cracked it open. Snow burst in like it had been waiting, stinging her face, blinding her. And there, collapsed against her threshold, was the largest man she'd ever seen. He was more mountain than man, covered in snow and ice. A giant carved from winter itself. His coat, if it could be called that, seemed to be made of bear hide and other furs. Ice crystals clung to a beard that would have done Moses proud, but it was the blood that made her gasp, a dark stain spreading from his left shoulder, black against the snow. For a moment, she stood frozen. He could be anyone, an outlaw, a madman, a threat to everything she'd fought to protect. But then he lifted his head just slightly, and she saw his eyes, gray as the storm, gray as morning, and filled with a pain that went beyond the physical. "Please," he whispered, the single word barely audible over the wind. Decision made. Abigail set the rifle aside and grabbed him under his good arm. "Can you stand? You need to help me. I can't lift you alone." He tried. Lord, how he tried. Using the doorframe for support, he hauled himself up and up and up, even hunched over. He had to duck to enter the cabin. Abigail pushed the door shut behind them, fighting the wind for every inch, and dropped the bar back into place. In the lamplight, he was even more imposing. 6.5 feet at least, shoulders broad as an oak tree, hands that could probably snap her in half without effort. The furs he wore dripped melting snow onto her floorwolf pelts. She realized, and bare, and others she couldn't identify. Beneath them, his clothing was rough homespun, patched and mended like her own. He swayed on his feet, and she guided him toward the fire. "Sit," she ordered, surprised by the authority in her voice. "Sarah, stay in bed," she added. seeing her daughter's eyes peek out from the quilts. The man collapsed onto the floor near the hearth, too large for any chair she owned. Up close, she could see the wound better, a deep gash across his shoulder and chest, like something had clawed him, or someone had cut him. "I need to look at that wound," she said. "Can you—" She gestured at his furs. He nodded, fumbling with frozen fingers at the leather ties. She helped, trying not to think about the impropriety of undressing a strange man in her home. Survival came before society's rules out here. The furs came away heavy with snow and blood. Beneath them, his shirt was ruined, torn and stained. The wound was worse than she'd thought, long but not too deep, already starting to fester at the edges. "What happened to you?" she asked, gathering clean rags and the bottle of whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. "Bear," he said simply. His voice was rough as gravel, like he wasn't used to speaking. "Surprised her with cubs. My fault." She believed him. The wound had the jagged edges of claws, not the clean line of a knife. "This is going to hurt," she warned, soaking a rag with whiskey. "Been hurt before," he said, then proved it by barely flinching when she pressed the alcohol to the wound. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his weathered skin, but he made no sound. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound as best she could by firelight. Sarah had crept out of bed and stood watching with wide eyes. The man noticed her and, despite his pain, attempted what might have been a smile. It transformed his face from frightening to merely forbidding. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, with a child's fearless curiosity. "Jonas," he said after a pause, like he had to remember it. "Jonas Harrow." "I'm Sarah. That's my mama, Abigail. We don't got a papa anymore." "Sarah," Abigail scolded, but Jonas just nodded gravely. "Sorry for your loss, little one," he said. And somehow Abigail knew he understood loss intimately. She finished cleaning the wound and bound it with strips torn from an old petticoat. Her mother would have been scandalized, but her mother had never faced a Wyoming blizzard with a wounded giant bleeding on her floor. "Thank you," Jonas said when she finished. He started to stand. "I'll move on now. Don't want to bring trouble." "Move on where?" Abigail asked incredulously. "Listen to that storm. You wouldn't make it 10 feet. As if to emphasize her point, the wind struck the cabin so hard that dust sifted down from the rafters. Jonas wavered, and she saw what the effort of staying upright was costing him. "You're staying put," she said firmly. "I didn't waste good whiskey and petticoat just to have you freeze to death on my doorstep. Sarah, fetch the extra quilts from the chest." Sarah scampered off while Abigail arranged a makeshift bed near the fire. It was highly improper, having a strange man sleep in their one-room cabin. But propriety, like pride, was a luxury she couldn't afford. Outside, the storm raged on, and she had a child to protect. Sometimes that meant barring the door against danger. Sometimes it meant opening it. Jonas settled onto the floor with obvious relief, his massive frame making her cabin seem even smaller. "Haven't been inside walls in months," he murmured, already half asleep. "Forgot how it felt." Abigail studied him in the firelight. His face was all angles and weathering, marked by wind and sun and something harder to name. Scars crossed his hands, and what she could see of his arms, a lifetime written in damaged flesh. Yet, when he'd smiled at Sarah, she'd seen gentleness there, carefully hidden but unmistakable. "Mama, is he going to die?" Sarah whispered, creeping close. "No, sweet pea, he's going to be fine, just needs rest and warmth." "He's bigger than Papa was, bigger than Mr. Morrison at the store, bigger than anybody." "Yes, he is. Now back to bed with you." But Sarah lingered, fascinated. "Is he a giant from the storybook?" Jonas's eyes opened slightly. "No giants here," he said softly. "Just a man who got turned around in the snow." Satisfied with this answer, Sarah allowed herself to be tucked back into bed. Abigail sat by the fire, Thomas's rifle across her lap. watching the stranger sleep. Every instinct warned her this was dangerous. A wounded bear was unpredictable. A wounded man could be worse. But something in those gray eyes, that careful gentleness with her daughter, made her believe the danger wasn't to them. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. Jonas slept like the dead, waking only when she changed his bandages or pressed water to his lips. The fever came, as she'd known it would, and she spent hours cooling his burning skin with a snowmelt and precious cloth. Sarah helped, patting his hand with her small ones, telling him stories about her chickens to help him feel better. On the second night, his fever broke. She was dozing in the chair when she heard him stir, sitting up despite the obvious pain. "The animals," he said. "Your animals, the storm." "They're sheltered," she assured him, "as best they can be." He looked around the cabin, truly seeing it for the first time. His gaze took in the meager supplies, the patched walls, the way she and Sarah shared everything. Understanding dawned in those gray eyes. "Your man, how long?" 15 months, she said quietly. "Heart gave out in the field." He nodded slowly. "Hard land for a woman alone." "Hard land for anyone," she corrected. "But it's our land." Something in his expression shifted. A recognition, perhaps. "Yes," he said. "I understand that." The wind still howled outside, but with less fury now. The worst of the storm was passing. Come morning, he would leave. She knew. Men like him didn't stay in one place long. But tonight, her cabin held 3 souls against the storm, and that felt less lonely than it had in months. "Rest," she told him. "You're safe here." He looked at her for a long moment, this giant of a man who'd faced bears and storms and God knew what else. "Been a long time since anyone said that to me," he admitted. Then he lay back down, and she kept her watch by the fire, guardian of this strange, temporary peace, while the Wyoming winter sang its ancient song outside their walls. The storm broke on the 3rd morning, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. Abigail woke to find Jonas already up, standing by the window, his massive frame blocking most of the light. He'd wrapped a quilt around his shoulders, but she could see he'd rebound his wound himself, neat and efficient. "Didn't mean to sleep so long," he said without turning. His voice was still rough, but stronger now. "You needed it." She rose from the chair, working the knots from her neck. "How's the shoulder?" "I've had worse." He turned then, and in the morning light she could see him more clearly. His hair was dark, shot through with gray like iron ore, hanging past his shoulders. The beard was thick but surprisingly well kept. She'd expected wildness, but there was a careful order to him, like a man holding himself in tight check. Sarah stirred in the bed. "Is the giant still here?" "Jonas," he corrected gently. "And yes, little one, still here." "Good." Sarah bounced out of bed, apparently deciding his presence was now part of their natural order. "Are you hungry? Mama makes good biscuits." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. "When we have flour," she added quietly. Jonas studied her, those gray eyes missing nothing. "I have supplies," he said. "In my pack, if the storm didn't take it, flour, salt pork, coffee." "We couldn't." "You saved my life." His tone brooked no argument. "Least I can do is share my provisions." He moved to the door, and she noticed how he had to duck, how carefully he maneuvered in the small space, like a bear trying not to break the furniture. "I'll check the animals too," he said. "That lean-to won't have held." Not in that blow. He was right. When he opened the door, they could see the damage. Part of the lean-to roof had collapsed under the snow's weight, but Moses and Bessie were still there, pressed together for warmth, alive if unhappy. Without being asked, Jonas began clearing snow, despite his wound. He worked with steady efficiency, using his hands when needed, fashioning a crude shovel from a board. Abigail watched from the doorway. Sarah peeking around her skirts. "He's strong," Sarah whispered, awed. Yes, Abigail thought, but it was more than that. It was the way he spoke softly to Moses as he worked, the careful way he checked Bessie for injury, the grunt of satisfaction when he found the chickens had survived in their coop. This was a man who understood animals, who moved through the world with deliberate gentleness despite his size. By noon, he'd cleared paths to all the outbuildings and retrieved his pack from where he'd dropped it by the door. True to his word. It contained provisions more than she'd seen in months. He laid them on the table like an offering a sack of flour, salt pork wrapped in oilcloth, real coffee, dried beans, even a small pouch of sugar. "This is too much," Abigail protested. "It's winter food," he said simply, "meant to be shared in shelter." She made biscuits with the flour, fried salt pork, put on real coffee. The smell filled the cabin like a celebration. Sarah chattered through the meal, telling Jonas about each chicken by name, about the mouse under the stove, about how Papa used to let her ride on his shoulders to see over the tall grass. Jonas listened with grave attention, asking questions that made Sarah beam. "That rooster sounds like a fierce one," he said. "Best to have a good rooster. Protects the hens." "His name is Captain," Sarah informed him, "because he marches around like a soldier." After the meal, Jonas rose carefully. "That roof needs fixing. You have tools." "Some in the barn," Abigail hesitated. "Your shoulder will hurt whether I work or not." He gave her a look that reminded her of Thomas, that male stubbornness in the face of physical limitation. "Rather be useful." She couldn't argue with that. She'd felt the same way every day since Thomas died, the need to keep moving, keep working, keep being useful against the weight of grief. He found Thomas's tools, handled them with respect. "Your man kept these well," he said, running a thumb along a saw blade. "Says something about him." "He was a good man," Abigail said softly. "A dreamer, but a good man." "Nothing wrong with dreams." Jonas replied, "Long as you're willing to work for them." He spent the afternoon fixing the lean-to, working steadily despite the cold. Sarah appointed herself his assistant, handing him nails, chattering constantly. He showed infinite patience, letting her help, teaching her which board went where. "You know a lot about building," Sarah observed. "Had to learn." Jonas positioned another board. "No one else to do it where I lived." "Where was that?" He paused, hammer raised. "Up in the mountains, place called Sweetwater." "Why'd you leave?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Sometimes a man needs to find new mountains," he said finally. Sarah accepted this with a child's easy philosophy. But Abigail, watching from the doorway, heard what he didn't say. Something had driven him from his mountains, something more than wanderlust or winter weather. That evening, with the animals secure and fed, they sat by the fire. Jonas had insisted on splitting wood, ignoring her protests about his wound. The pile by the door was now respectable, enough for several days at least. Sarah sat at his feet, drawing on precious paper with charcoal, showing him each picture. "That's you," she said, holding up a drawing of what might have been a tree or a very tall stick. "See, you're bigger than the house." Jonas studied it seriously. "Good likeness," he said, and Sarah giggled. Abigail found herself watching them. This giant of a man being gentle with her tiny daughter. His hands, so capable of violence she'd seen the scars, were careful as he helped Sarah sharpen her charcoal. Patient as he showed her how to shade her drawings. "Do you have children?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Something shuddered in his face. "No," he said quietly. "Never had that blessing." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No harm in asking." He focused on Sarah's drawing. "Just wasn't meant for some men, I suppose." Later, after Sarah was asleep, they sat in comfortable silence. The fire crackled. Wind whispered around the corners of the cabin, but gently now, without malice. Abigail worked on her mending. Jonas carved something from a piece of wood, a toy for Sarah. She realized, a little horse taking shape under his knife. "Why were you out in that storm?" she asked eventually. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Following the trap lines," he said finally. "But that's not the whole truth." He looked up from his carving. "Truth is, I've been drifting since autumn, looking for something, maybe, or running from something. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." She understood that. "We ran here," she admitted. "From Boston. From family who said Thomas was a fool. From a life that felt like it was strangling us. He wanted land, space, freedom. I wanted—" She paused, surprised at herself for speaking so freely. "I wanted him to be happy." "Were you happy?" "Yes," the answer came without hesitation. "It was hard, harder than either of us expected. But yes, until the end." Jonas nodded, returning to his carving. "Good land here," he said. "Harsh but good. A place that lets you know what you're made of." "And what are you made of, Mr. Harrow?" He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "Same as everyone. I expect dust and dreams and too much stubbornness." He held up the carved horse. "Nearly finished. Though Sarah might say I'm made of mountains." "Despite herself." Abigail laughed. It felt strange in her throat, rusty from disuse. When had she last laughed? Not since Thomas, surely. "You should do that more," Jonas said quietly. "Laugh. It suits you." Heat rose to her cheeks again, and she bent over her mending. "Not much cause for laughter these days." "No," he agreed, "but that makes it more precious when it comes." They lapsed back into silence, but it was warmer now, companionable. Outside, an owl called, and another answered. The world went on, winter locked but alive. Inside, the fire burned steady, and for the first time in months, Abigail didn't feel the weight of being alone. "I should move on tomorrow," Jonas said suddenly. "Weather's clear. You've done enough." "That's your choice," she said, surprised by the disappointment that flashed through her. "But the wound needs more time, and there's work here. If you're willing, I can't pay much, but—" "Don't want pay." He set down the carved horse, perfect in miniature. "But work I can do." Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them. Not attraction, not yet too soon for that, too much grief still fresh. But understanding, perhaps, recognition of shared loneliness, shared strength, shared need to keep moving forward despite the weight of the past. "Stay then," she said simply, "until you're healed, until the work's done, until—" She couldn't finish, didn't know how to— "Until," he agreed, and that seemed to be enough. The fire burned low. They banked it for the night, moving with the easy coordination of people who understood the rhythms of survival. He spread his bedroll by the hearth. She retreated behind the curtain to the bed she shared with Sarah. "Mama," Sarah murmured sleepily. "Is Jonas gonna stay?" "For a while, sweet pea." "Good, I like him. He makes the house feel fuller." Yes, Abigail thought, settling beside her daughter. That was exactly it. The cabin was still small, still poor, still threatened by winter and isolation. But it felt fuller now, as if Jonas had brought more than just his physical presence. He'd brought possibility. Maybe, or just the reminder that they weren't the only ones trying to carve meaning from this hard land. She fell asleep to the sound of his quiet breathing beyond the curtain, steady as a mountain wind. And, for the first time in 15 months, she didn't dream of empty fields. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of work and winter quiet. Jonas's wound healed clean, the angry red fading to pink. He'd taken to the daily chores like a man remembering something precious the cow milked at dawn. Wood split before breakfast, the endless repairs that a homestead demanded. His presence had become so natural that Abigail sometimes forgot to be surprised when she saw his massive frame ducking through the doorway. Sarah had adopted him completely. She followed him like a devoted shadow, chattering endlessly while he worked. He taught her to whittle, her small hands guided by his scarred ones. He showed her how to read weather and cloud formations, how to tell if a chicken was ailing, how to mend harness leather with patient stitches. Jonas says the mountains talk if you listen right. Sarah announced one evening over supper. He says they tell stories about the old times. Is that so? Abigail served beans and biscuits, noting how their meals had improved with Jonas's contributions. He'd gone hunting twice, bringing back rabbit and even a small deer. The meat, smoked and stored, would last weeks. Mountains got long memories, Jonas said quietly, longer than men. Sarah beamed at him, and Abigail saw him soften, that careful guard dropping just a little. He was different with Sarah, still quiet, still careful, but willing to share pieces of himself he kept hidden otherwise. That night, after Sarah slept, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. Jonas worked on a new project, a doll for Sarah from corn husks and scraps of cloth Abigail had given him. His huge fingers moved with surprising delicacy, creating something magical from nothing. "You're good with her," Abigail said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She's easy to be good with." He tied off a tiny arm with thread. "Reminds me." He stopped, jaw tightening. Abigail waited. Having learned that pushing Jonas to speak was like pushing a mountain, pointless and likely to hurt only yourself. "Had a sister once," he said finally. "Much younger. Same way about her, always talking, always asking questions, always believing the world was bigger and better than it was." "What happened to her?" "Fever took her. She was 7. His hand stilled on the doll. "That was 30 years ago now. Family scattered after that. Pa couldn't stand the farm without her laughter. Ma just faded. I'm sorry." He shrugged, but she saw the old pain in the gesture. "Long time ago, but sometimes, listening to Sarah," he cleared his throat. "Well, it's good to hear that sound again." They worked in silence after that, but Abigail felt she understood him better. A man who'd lost his family, who'd spent 30 years in mountains and solitude, slowly forgetting how to be around people, until a storm drove him to their door. The next morning brought trouble in the form of Reverend Josiah Brewster and his wife, Martha. Abigail saw their wagon approaching across the snow-covered prairie and felt her stomach drop. She'd managed to avoid town and its gossip since the storm, but news traveled even in winter. "Visitors," she told Jonas, who was repairing the chicken coop. He straightened, instantly alert. "Want me to make myself scarce?" Part of her did, but the larger part, the part tired of bowing to others' judgments, shook her head. "No, you live here, you work here. Nothing shameful in that." Still, her hands trembled as she smoothed her hair, pinched color into her cheeks. The Brewsters were pillars of Bitter Creek society, such as it was. Their opinion carried weight. "So, Mrs. Henderson." Reverend Brewster called out jovially as their wagon pulled up. "Blessed morning to you." "Reverend Mrs. Brewster." Abigail stepped out to greet them, aware of Jonas moving to stand behind her, a solid presence at her back. Martha Brewster's eyes went immediately to him, widening with shock and something else, avid curiosity, perhaps, or judgment. "We heard, that is, someone mentioned you had taken in a boarder." "Mr. Harrow has been helping with the heavy work," Abigail said evenly. "In exchange for meals and a place by the fire. With Thomas gone, I need the help." Of course. Reverend Brewster's smile was strained as he took in Jonas's size, his rough clothing, the careful distance he kept. "And you are Mr. Jonas Harrow." Jonas's voice was flat, giving nothing. "From these parts." "From the mountains." An awkward silence fell. Martha clutched her husband's arm, as if Jonas might suddenly attack. Sarah chose that moment to burst from the cabin. "Mama Jonas, look what She stopped, seeing the visitors, then brightened. "Hello, Mrs. Brewster. Want to see what Jonas taught me? I can whistle like a meadowlark now." She demonstrated, producing a credible bird call. Jonas's mouth twitched in what might have been pride. "That's very nice, dear," Martha said faintly. "Sarah, why don't you come to the wagon? I brought some peppermint sticks from town." But Sarah had already grabbed Jonas's hand, tugging him down to her level to whisper something that made him nod seriously. The easy intimacy of the gesture clearly scandalized Martha further. "I'm Mrs. Henderson," the Reverend said carefully. "Perhaps we could speak privately." Abigail felt her spine stiffen. "Anything you need to say can be said here. Reverend?" He glanced at Jonas, then forged ahead. "There's been talk in town about your situation. A young widow, alone with a child, taking in a strange man." "A hired hand," Abigail interrupted. "Yes, but surely you see how it looks. What people might think. I see that people have too much time for thinking and not enough for Christian charity," Abigail said sharply. "Where was this concern when I was trying to split wood with frozen hands? When Sarah was sick with croup and I had no one to ride for the doctor?" Martha gasped at her tone. The Reverend flushed. "Now, Mrs. Henderson. It's true, and you know it." Abigail felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. "Everyone was happy to let us struggle alone as long as we did it quietly. But let me accept help from a good man who asks nothing but honest work. And suddenly everyone's concerned about propriety." "Abigail." Jonas's quiet voice stopped her tirade. He stepped forward, and both Brewsters stepped back. "It's all right." "It's not all right." "Ma'am," he addressed Martha directly, his voice gentle. "I understand your concerns. A mother myself would have them. I give you my word that Mrs. Henderson and her daughter have nothing to fear from me. I'm here to work, nothing more. When the work's done, I'll move on." Something in his manner, that careful gentleness, despite his intimidating size, seemed to reach Martha. She released her death grip on her husband's arm slightly. "You were injured," she said, noticing the way he held his left shoulder. "The storm." "Bear," Jonas said simply. "Mrs. Henderson saved my life. I owe her a debt." "I see." Martha looked between them, and Abigail saw her taking in details the improved woodpile, the repaired coop, Sarah's obvious adoration of Jonas. "Well, I suppose, that is, if you're truly just here to help." "Martha," the Reverend warned, but his wife had always been the more practical of the two. "Oh, hush, Josiah. Look at this place. Look how well fed that child is, how much better everything looks. If Mr. Harrow wants to work for meals and shelter, and Mrs. Henderson needs the help, then perhaps we should thank God for providing rather than questioning his methods." The Reverend sputtered, but Martha was already climbing down from the wagon. "Now then, I did bring those peppermints, and some preserves, Abigail. I've been meaning to ask about your pickle recipe." And just like that, the moment passed. Martha distributed sweets, admired the repairs, even unbent enough to compliment Jonas on his carved toys for Sarah. When they left an hour later, the worst of the danger seemed past. But as the wagon disappeared over the horizon, Jonas turned to Abigail with troubled eyes. "This will cause you problems." "Let it." She was surprised by her own vehemence. "I'm tired of living for other people's opinions." "Sarah needs food and shelter and safety more than she needs the approval of gossips." Abigail took a breath, tried to calm herself. "I'm sorry. I know this puts you in a difficult position, too." "I've been in worse positions." He paused, studying her. "That was brave, what you did, standing up to them." "That wasn't brave. That was just angry." Sometimes they're the same thing. That evening, Sarah was quieter than usual. Sensing the day's tension, she curled against Jonas as he read to her from Pilgrim's Progress, his deep voice making the familiar words new. Abigail watched them from her mending, saw how Sarah's eyes drooped, how she trusted completely. "Will you really go away?" Sarah asked sleepily. "When the work's done?" Jonas's voice caught. "That's the plan, little one." "I don't want you to go. You're—" Sarah yawned hugely. "You're bigger than our whole house. If you go, it'll feel empty again." Abigail's needle stilled. Jonas had gone very quiet, staring at the book as if it held answers. "Go to sleep, sweet pea," Abigail said softly. "Tomorrow's a new day." After Sarah was tucked in bed, Jonas stood by the window, a shadow against shadow. "She shouldn't get attached," he said roughly. "It'll hurt her when I go." "She's 5. Everything hurts at that age. Everything heals too." "And you," he turned to look at her, "are you getting attached?" The question hung in the air between them. Abigail felt her heart pound, knew he could probably hear it in the silence. "You're bigger than my whole world," she whispered, the words surprising her. "That's what Sarah means. You've made our world bigger just by being in it. However long you stay, I'm grateful for that." Jonas made a sound, pain or surprise, or something else entirely. He pressed one huge hand against the window pane, and she saw it tremble. "Abigail," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer in his rough voice. I can't." "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "Just telling you the truth. You deserve that much." He turned away from the window, and in the firelight she saw tears on his weathered face. This giant of a man, who'd fought bears and survived blizzards, was crying silently in her small cabin. "Nobody said anything like that to me in I can't remember how long," he whispered. "I'd forgotten people could be kind without wanting something." She moved without thinking, crossing to him, reaching up to touch his face. He flinched but didn't pull away. "We're not asking for anything," she repeated. "Just for you to stay until you're ready to go. That's all." He caught her hand in his, held it gently. His palm swallowed hers completely, but the touch was infinitely careful. "Until I'm ready," he agreed. And she heard the promise in it, not of forever, but of not leaving carelessly, not leaving without thought for what he left behind. It was enough, in that moment, with winter pressing against the windows and Sarah sleeping safe nearby. It was more than enough. They stood together in the flickering light, her hand in his, and let that be what it was: connection without demand, warmth against the cold, two souls finding shelter in an unexpected place. The trouble came on a market day in early March, when the prairie was caught between winter and spring, mud and ice fighting for dominance. Abigail had no choice but to go to town. They needed salt, thread, and medicine for Moses, who'd developed a worrying cough. "I'll come with you," Jonas said, already reaching for his coat. "No," she said it too quickly, saw the flicker of hurt in his eyes. "I mean, it might be better if you stayed. Watch Sarah. Tend the animals." He studied her, reading what she didn't say. Town meant people. People meant questions, stares, judgment. Martha Brewster might have softened, but others wouldn't be so kind. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She tried to smile. "I've been managing town runs for over a year alone." But she hadn't counted on Jake Morrison being drunk at 10 in the morning, or on him having company 3 other men from the Bar J Ranch, all deep in their cups despite the early hour. They were loitering outside Morrison's store when she pulled up in the wagon. Well, Morrison's eyes were mean with whiskey. "The widow Henderson graces us with her presence." Abigail kept her head high, climbing down from the wagon. "Mr. Morrison, I need supplies." "Do you now?" He blocked her path, breath sour with alcohol. "Here you got yourself a man out there. Big fellow, strange fellow." "I have a hired hand helping with spring work." She tried to step around him, but one of his companions moved to block her. "Hired hand," Morrison laughed. "Ugly sound. That what they're calling it now? Letting some mountain savage warm your bed?" "Watch your tongue." Her voice came out harder than intended. "Or what you'll set your tame bear on me." Morrison swayed closer. "Maybe you like them big and rough. Maybe your Thomas wasn't man enough." The slap echoed across the muddy street. Morrison staggered back, hand to his reddening cheek. Shock replacing smugness. For a moment, everything stood still. Then his face darkened with rage. "You little—" He grabbed for her, and Abigail stumbled backward, boot catching in her skirts. She would have fallen if strong arms hadn't caught her, pulled her aside. Not Jonas Will Patterson from the livery stable, weathered and respectable. "That's enough, Jake." Will's voice carried quiet authority. "You're drunk. Go home." "She hit me." "After you spoke words no man should say to a woman. Your mother would be ashamed." Others had emerged from shops, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Olson from the boarding house, the Schmidt brothers from the smithy, even Reverend Brewster. Abigail felt their eyes like weights, judging, calculating. Morrison spat in the mud. "Defending her honor, she's got none left to defend. Keeping that creature— Mr. Harrow saved her life in the storm." Martha Brewster's voice cut through clear as a bell. She stood on the mercantile steps, chin raised. "And he's been nothing but proper and helpful," which is more than can be said for men who drink before noon and assault women in the street. A murmur ran through the crowd. Morrison's companions began edging away, suddenly finding the ground fascinating. "This ain't over," Morrison snarled at Abigail. "You and your pet monster. This ain't over." He stalked off, his friends trailing behind. The crowd began to disperse, but not before Abigail caught the whispers, the looks. Will Patterson helped her into the store, where Mrs. Morrison, a mouse of a woman married to a rat, filled her order with trembling hands. The ride home seemed endless. Her hands shook on the reins, reaction setting in. Not fear of Morrison himself, he was a coward at heart, but fear of what he represented. The ugliness lurking beneath the surface of their small community, ready to emerge at any sign of difference or vulnerability. Jonas knew something was wrong the moment she pulled up. He was out the door before she'd set the brake, reading her face with those keen gray eyes. "What happened?" "Nothing, just town." She climbed down, legs unsteady. "Abigail." He caught her arm gently. "What happened?" The kindness in his voice undid her. The tears came suddenly, furiously, all the anger and humiliation pouring out. He guided her inside, Sarah watching wide-eyed from the table where she'd been practicing letters. "Mama, I'm all right. Sweet pea, just tired." Abigail swiped at her tears, furious at herself for breaking down. Jonas crouched before Sarah. "How about you go gather the eggs? Count them real careful for me." Sarah nodded, grabbing the egg basket and scampering out. The moment she was gone, Abigail sank into a chair. "Morrison," she said simply. "Drunk, said things. I slapped him." Jonas went very still. "Did he hurt you?" "No, Will Patterson intervened. But Jonas—" She looked up at him, saw the cold fury building in his eyes. "This is what I was afraid of. The talk, the judgment, it's only going to get worse." "Then I'll go." He said it flatly, like stating the weather. "Today, now. It's the only way." "No," the word tore from her throat. "Don't you see? That's what they want, to drive you off, to prove they were right about you, about me. I won't give them that satisfaction." "Your reputation is already ruined in their eyes. Widow woman, keeping house with a stranger. Nothing you do or don't do will change their minds now." Jonas paced the small cabin like a caged mountain cat, hands clenching and unclenching. I could talk to Morrison. No. She knew what his idea of talking would involve. That would only make things worse. Then what I won't stand by while they what talk, let them talk. Words are just wind. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Words could cut deeper than any blade, especially in a small community where reputation was currency. Jonas stopped pacing, stood before her. This is my fault. I stayed too long. Let myself... He trailed off, jaw working. I'll go to town, show them I'm no threat. Maybe if they see me, talk to me. They'll see what they want to see. A stranger, an outsider, someone different. Abigail stood, placed a hand on his arm. Jonas, I need you to understand something. This isn't about you, not really. It's about me refusing to play the proper widow, refusing to struggle prettily for their entertainment. You're just the excuse they've been waiting for. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it my choice. And I choose to keep the best help I've had since Thomas died. Gossip be damned. He caught her hand where it rested on his arm, held it carefully. You're sure? I'm sure. Sarah burst back in with the eggs, chattering about the chickens, but over supper, she was quieter than usual, sensing the tension. Finally, she looked at Jonas with worried eyes. Are people being mean because of us? Jonas and Abigail exchanged glances. How to explain prejudice to a 5-year-old? How to describe the smallness that made people cruel? Sometimes, Abigail said carefully, people are afraid of things they don't understand, and when they're afraid, they say mean things. Are they afraid of Jonas, but he's nice? I'm different, Jonas said quietly. Come from different places. Live a different way. That scares some folks. Sarah considered this. That's silly. Different is interesting. Like how you know about mountains and we know about prairie. If everyone was the same, it would be boring. From the mouths of babes, Abigail thought. You're absolutely right. Sweet pea. That night, unable to sleep, Abigail found Jonas sitting outside despite the cold, keeping watch like a sentinel. You should rest, she said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Can't keep thinking if Morrison comes here. He won't. He's a coward and a drunk, but not stupid enough to come to our home. She sat beside him on the step, close enough to feel his warmth. I'm sorry. For all of this, you came here hurt and seeking shelter, and instead, you got tangled in our troubles. Our troubles. He tested the words. You said our. Did I? But she knew she had, knew what it meant. Somewhere along the way, his presence had shifted from temporary to necessary, from stranger to, what family more? Abigail. He turned to her, and in the moonlight she could see the struggle in his face. I need to tell you something, about why I left the mountains. She waited, sensing this was important, this sharing of secrets under the cold stars. There was a woman, Mary, trapper's daughter. I thought we'd marry, but when her father died, her brothers came from back east. Took one look at me rough, wild, too much Indian in me for their comfort, though I'm not, and decided their sister deserved better. Fought them for the right to court her. He touched his scarred knuckles. Won the fight, lost Mary. She chose them, chose safety and propriety over whatever I was offering. Jonas! That was 10 years ago. Haven't been around people much since. Easier that way. Then I stumbled on your doorstep, and you... He shook his head. You didn't see a threat, even half frozen and bloodied. You saw a man needing help. Do you know how rare that is? I saw someone in need. That's all. That's everything. He turned back to the prairie, jaw set. I won't be the reason another woman loses her place in the world, but I won't leave you defenseless either. There has to be a way. There is. Abigail surprised herself with her certainty. We face them together. not as something shameful, but as what we are, a household surviving winter, helping each other. Let them see Sarah happy and healthy. Let them see the improvements you've made. Let them see us refusing to bow to their judgment. And if that's not enough, then we'll deal with what comes. She stood, hand briefly touching his shoulder. But we'll deal with it together. That's what frightens them most, I think, that we're managing without their approval. That we've made our own small world here. And it's good. Jonas caught her hand before she could go inside. "You're the brave one," he said quietly. "Not me. Facing down bears is nothing compared to facing down neighbors." She squeezed his fingers gently. "Then it's good we have each other. I'll face the neighbors. You handle the bears." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Deal." Inside, she checked on Sarah, sleeping peacefully with the carved horse Jonas had made clutched in her small fist. Tomorrow would bring what it brought: more gossip, more judgment, perhaps worse. But tonight, her daughter was safe. Her hired hand kept watch, and her small world, different though it was, held firm against the darkness. "Let them talk," she thought fiercely. "Let them judge. We'll endure it all the winter, the gossip, the loneliness. Together, we're bigger than their small minds can imagine." The wind picked up, rattling the windows, but the cabin stood strong. Jonas had reinforced it well. They'd reinforced each other too, she realized. Two damaged souls shoring up each other's broken places, creating something stronger than either could manage alone. Tomorrow, she'd go back to town if needed. Hold her head high. Show them that Abigail Henderson might be a widow, might be unconventional, but she was not broken. Not anymore. The decision came on a morning when spring finally showed its face. Timid green shoots pushing through the last stubborn snow. Jonas stood in the doorway, watching the sunrise paint the prairie gold, his pack at his feet. He'd been restless for days, like Moses when a storm was coming, and Abigail had known this moment would arrive. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. She'd found him organizing his few possessions the night before, seen the careful way he'd folded the shirt she'd mended for him. "It's time." His voice was rough with something more than mourning. "Snow's melting. Roads will be clear soon. You don't need—" "Don't!" She cut him off, unable to bear whatever reasonable lie he was about to tell. "Just don't." Sarah was still sleeping, curled in their bed like a kitten. Abigail was grateful for that small mercy. She couldn't watch her daughter's heart break too. "The talk in town is getting worse," Jonas said quietly. "Morrison's been stirring folks up. Yesterday, when I went to the smithy, Schmidt wouldn't serve me. Said it was bad for business. Schmidt's a coward. He's a man with a family to feed. Can't fault him for choosing their safety over principle." Jonas turned from the door, and she saw the weight of his decision in every line of his body. "It'll only get harder. For you, for Sarah. My being here is hurting you both. You being here is the only reason we made it through winter." "Winter's over, Abigail." "Is it?" She gestured at their home, the reinforced walls, the stocked woodpile, the thriving animals. "Look what you've built here. Look what we've built together. You'd throw that away because Jake Morrison runs his mouth." "I'd leave to protect you from worse than words." He met her eyes then, and the pain there took her breath. "You don't know what men like that can do when they feel their world's being threatened. I've seen it before." "So have I. You think I don't know what men do? I buried my husband. Jonas, I've faced winter alone. Wolves at the door. Literal and figurative. I'm not some fragile flower you need to protect." "I know that." He crossed to her in 2 strides, hands hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching. "God, don't you think I know that you're the strongest woman I've ever met? But strength shouldn't have to stand alone against the world's ugliness." "Then don't make me stand alone!" The words burst from her, fierce and desperate. "Don't you see you leaving doesn't protect us? It abandons us. It proves them right, that we're something shameful, something that needs to be hidden or ended." Abigail. You saved us. Her voice broke on the words. Not from the storm, not from the winter, from the emptiness. This cabin was a tomb before you came. Jonas, Sarah and I were just existing, going through motions. You brought life back to this place. He closed his eyes, jaw working. When he opened them, tears stood in those storm-gray depths. You saved me too. I'd been alone so long I'd forgotten how to be human, forgotten there was kindness in the world, gentleness. You and Sarah, you gave that back to me. Then why leave? Because He stopped, hands clenching. Because I care too much to stay. The words hung between them, admission and explanation, all at once. Abigail felt her heart pound, blood rushing in her ears. Jonas. No, let me finish. He began to pace, the cabin suddenly too small for his agitation. I came here half dead, running from one kind of loneliness. But what I found, Abigail, I watch you with Sarah and my chest gets so tight I can't breathe. I see you by the fire mending clothes and I want things I have no right to want. I'm a rough man, a wanderer. I've got nothing to offer but a strong back and willing hands. You think that's nothing? Abigail stepped into his path, forcing him to stop. You think Sarah cares that you don't have money or fine clothes. You think I care. You've given us safety. Jonas, laughter, hope. You've made us a family again. That's the problem. His voice was barely a whisper. I let myself pretend, let myself believe I could belong here, be the man you both deserve. But I'm not. I'm just a mountain hermit who forgot his place. Your place is here. Abigail grabbed his hands, held them tight when he would have pulled away. Your place is teaching Sarah to whistle like birds and carve toys from wood. Your place is fixing everything that's broken, including hearts. Your place is with us. If you just stop running long enough to see it. He looked down at their joined hands, her small one swallowed by his. You don't understand. If I stay, it won't be as your hired hand. I can't keep pretending that's all I am. All I want to be. Then don't pretend. The words came out fierce and certain. Stop pretending and tell me the truth. All of it. He raised his eyes to hers, and what she saw there made her knees weak. The truth is, I love you both so much it terrifies me. The truth is, I'd die before letting anyone hurt you or Sarah. The truth is, I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life and see you by the fire. Hear Sarah singing to her chickens. I want to add rooms to this cabin, plant crops in those fields, build a life that's ours. His voice roughened. But wanting and deserving are different things. Says who? Abigail reached up, framed his weathered face with her hands. Who decides what we deserve, the town Morrison or us? You'd take on that burden, a man with no family name worth mentioning. No prospects beyond his own labor. You'd let Sarah call me. He couldn't finish. She already calls you Pa when she thinks I'm not listening. Abigail smiled through her tears. Has for weeks now. And as for burdens, Jonas Harrow, you're not a burden. You're a blessing I never thought to ask for. You're the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. He made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and pulled her against him, careful as always of his strength. She pressed her face against his chest, heard his heart thundering. I'm not an easy man, he warned. I have nightmares. I forget how to talk to people. I've been alone so long. And I'm not an easy woman. I'm stubborn and proud, and I've forgotten how to trust. But maybe that's why we work. We know what it costs to try again. He pulled back enough to see her face, one huge hand coming up to cradle her cheek. If I stay for good. No more talk of leaving. No more running. I'd be yours, wholly and completely. And we'd be yours, wholly and completely. Even when the town, especially then. She turned her head, pressed a kiss to his palm. Let them talk. Let them judge. We'll build something stronger than their small minds can tear down. He was quiet for a long moment, thumb tracing her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. Then, you're bigger than my whole world. You know that you and Sarah both, you've taken this hermit who'd shrunk his world down to mountains and loneliness and made him remember how vast life can be. Then stay, she whispered. Stay and help us make it even bigger. He kissed her then, careful and reverent, like a man handling something precious he'd never thought to hold. She kissed him back, pouring all her certainty into it, all her fierce determination that this good thing wouldn't be taken from them. Mama. They broke apart to find Sarah in the doorway, hair mussed with sleep. The carved horse clutched in her hand. Her eyes went from one to the other, then to Jonas's pack by the door, and her small face crumpled. You're leaving. It came out as barely a whisper. You're going away. Jonas crossed to her in one stride, knelt to her level. Sarah, you promised. She hit him with her small fists, tears streaming. You promised to teach me about the mountains. You promised to help with the new calf you promised. Sarah, sweet pea, Abigail started. But Jonas caught the little girl's hands gently. You're right, he said solemnly. I did promise. And a man doesn't break his promises, does he? Sarah shook her head, hiccuping through her tears. So I have a question for you. Little one, a big, important question. He glanced at Abigail, then back to Sarah. How would you feel if I stayed, not just for now, but for always if I became part of your family, real and proper? Sarah's eyes went wide. Like a papa. Exactly like that, if your mama agrees, and if you'll have me. Sarah looked at Abigail, who nodded through her own tears. Then she threw herself at Jonas, small arms trying to wrap around his neck. Yes, 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 Mama, he's staying, Jonas is staying. He caught her up, stood with her in his arms, and she looked tiny against his bulk, but perfectly safe, perfectly home. Abigail moved to them, was pulled into the embrace, and for a moment they stood there a family choosing each other despite all the reasons the world might say they shouldn't. It won't be easy, Jonas murmured over Sarah's head. Nothing worth having ever is, Abigail replied. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, warming the prairie, coaxing more green from the earth. Spring had come at last, bringing with it the promise of new growth, new life, new chances. Inside the cabin that had once held only grief, 3 hearts beat together, no longer alone. Jonas set Sarah down, picked up his pack. For a moment, Abigail's heart seized. Then he upended it, began putting things away on shelves, in corners, making himself part of the household in a way he'd held back from before. We'll need to go to town, he said, folding away his traveling clothes. Make things proper, legal. The Reverend won't. Then we'll find someone who will. Justice of the peace. Traveling preacher. Don't much care. Long as it's binding. He paused in his unpacking, looked at her with sudden uncertainty. That is, if you want. Jonas Harrow, are you proposing? He flushed, the sight incongruous on such a mountain of a man. Suppose I am, though I should do it proper. This is proper, Abigail interrupted. This is us. This is perfect. Sarah danced between them, singing something about weddings and parties and new dresses. The cabin filled with her joy, pushing out the last shadows of doubt and fear. Well then, Jonas said, smiling that rare, transformative smile. Guess I'm staying. Guess you are. Abigail agreed, heart so full she thought it might burst. They'd face the town soon enough, face the gossip and judgment and small-minded fury of those who couldn't understand choosing love over convention. But right now, in this moment, they were complete a family forged not by blood but by choice, by courage, by the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let fear win. The sun climbed higher, blessing their small homestead with warmth and light, and in that humble cabin on the vast prairie, 3 souls who'd been lost in different kinds of wilderness finally, truly, came home. The words hung in the morning air like prayer bells, each one a promise, a commitment, a bridge between what was and what could be. Abigail watched Jonas's face transform as the reality settled over him. This was real. This was happening. They were choosing each other against all odds and opposition. "You're not a burden," she repeated, needing him to understand this fundamental truth. "You're not something we're settling for or making do with. You're who we want, who we choose." Jonas set down the shirt he'd been folding, crossed to her with that careful grace big men sometimes possess. His hands, scarred and weathered from years of solitary survival, framed her face with infinite tenderness. "I've been running so long," he whispered. "From people, from feeling, from the possibility of loss. Built walls higher than mountains around myself. Then you and Sarah," his voice broke. "You walked right through those walls like they were morning mist." "We needed someone who understood walls," Abigail said softly. "Someone who knew why we'd built our own. Thomas's death, it locked something in me, made me forget that hearts could expand, that love wasn't a finite resource that once spent was gone forever." Sarah had settled on the floor with her carved horse, making it gallop across the boards while humming to herself. But Abigail knew she was listening with that uncanny awareness children possessed, absorbing every word, every emotion. "When Mary chose her brothers over me," Jonas continued, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, "I told myself it was proof I wasn't meant for family life, that some men were born to be alone, and fighting that truth only brought pain. Spent 10 years believing that lie. And now I know the truth. I wasn't meant to be alone. I was meant to wait. Wait for a woman strong enough to see past the rough edges. Wait for a little girl who'd look at me and see not a monster but a protector. Wait for this moment, this choice, this chance." Abigail felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were different from all the tears she'd shed since Thomas died. These were tears of possibility, of hope, of a future suddenly expanded beyond mere survival. "Pa," Sarah's voice was small but certain. They both turned to find her standing, the carved horse clutched to her chest. "That's what I want to call you, not Jonas anymore. Pa." Jonas dropped to one knee, holding out his arms, and Sarah flew into them. He held her carefully, this giant man cradling this tiny girl like she was spun from gossamer and starlight. "Pa, it is," he said roughly. "If that's what you want, little one, that's what I'll be, your PA, from now until the mountains crumble to dust. Forever and ever. Longer than that." Sarah pulled back, studied his face with those two wise eyes. "You have to promise properly, the way Mama taught me. Cross your heart and hope to—" "Sarah," Abigail interrupted gently, knowing where that childhood oath led. But Jonas completed it solemnly, crossing his heart with one finger. "Cross my heart and hope to die if I should ever break this promise. I'm your PA now. Sarah Henderson. Nothing on this earth or above it will change that." "Sarah Harrow," the little girl corrected with a bright smile. "If you're marrying Mama, I'll be Sarah Harrow." Something passed across Jonas's face, wonder, fear, joy so profound it seemed to pain him. "Sarah Harrow," he repeated. "That sounds just about perfect." Abigail moved to them, was pulled into the embrace. And for a long moment they stayed that way, three souls choosing to become one family, despite everything the world might say about propriety or convention. "We should talk practical matters," Jonas said eventually, though he didn't release them. "I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to help with supplies. Maybe add that room you've been wanting for Sarah." "You've been thinking about this." It wasn't a question. "Been thinking about it since the night you told me I was bigger than your whole world." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle as snowfall. "Been fighting it too, telling myself I had no right. But maybe rights aren't given. Maybe they're chosen. Like families." Sarah piped up. "We're choosing to be a family." "Wisest thing I've heard all year." Jonas agreed. "And speaking of choosing, we need to make plans. Town won't make this easy." Abigail felt her spine stiffen with remembered insults. Morrison's ugly words. The judgment in so many eyes. But then she looked at Jonas, at Sarah, at what they were building together, and her resolve hardened to iron. Let them try to stop us. We'll go to Cedar Ridge if we have to. It's a day's ride, but they have a justice of the peace who won't care about gossip. You've thought about this too. Jonas's eyes held wonder and something deeper respect for her fierce practicality. I've thought about everything, she admitted. Late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd plan it all out. Where we could go, what we'd need, how to protect Sarah from the worst of the talk. I never quite believed you'd stay. Believe it now. He stood, lifting Sarah easily to his hip. With his free arm, he pulled Abigail close. I'm not just staying. I'm planting roots so deep they'll have to dynamite me out. This is my ground now. You and Sarah are my people, and I'll defend both against anyone who tries to say different. A knock at the door interrupted them, 3 sharp raps that spoke of urgency. They exchanged glances. Visitors this early meant trouble. Jonas set Sarah down gently, moved to the door with Abigail behind him. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from its place, checking the load. Whatever came, they'd face it together. But when Jonas opened the door, it wasn't Morrison or an angry mob. It was Martha Brewster, alone, carrying a covered basket and wearing an expression of determined kindness. Mrs. Brewster. Abigail couldn't hide her surprise. May I come in? I have things to say, and I'd rather not say them to the whole prairie. Jonas stepped aside, and Martha entered, taking in their defensive positions with knowing eyes. You thought I was bringing trouble. Most early visitors do, Abigail said carefully. Martha set her basket on the table, pulled back the cloth to reveal fresh bread, preserves, and, surprisingly, a small cake decorated with early wildflowers. I've come to apologize, she said without preamble, and to offer my help, if you'll have it. Help with what? Jonas's voice was cautious. Martha looked between them, saw their closeness, the way they moved as a unit, and smiled. With your wedding, of course. Did you think you could keep that secret? Sarah told the Olsen girl yesterday that she was getting a new PA. It's all over town by now. And you're here to talk us out of it? Abigail couldn't keep the defensive edge from her voice. I'm here to talk sense into my husband. Martha's chin lifted. Josiah's a good man, but he's forgotten that Christianity is about love, not judgment. I've reminded him quite forcefully that if he won't perform your ceremony, he's failing in his duty to God and community both. He won't do it, Jonas said flatly. Not for me. I'm too much an outsider. You saved the widow Henderson and her daughter from winter starvation. You've worked honestly for your keep. You've shown nothing but propriety and kindness. If that's not Christian behavior, I don't know what is. Martha turned to Abigail. I've brought more than cake. I've brought my mother's wedding dress. It might need altering, but Sarah's handy with a needle. Abigail felt her throat close with emotion. Martha, why would you do this? Because I remember being young and in love and having the whole world tell me I was making a mistake. Martha's eyes grew distant. Josiah wasn't always a reverend. He was a wild boy, a dreamer. My parents said I could do better, but I knew what I knew. And 40 years later, I've never regretted choosing love over approval. The town will talk regardless. At least if you're properly married, they'll have less ammunition. Martha reached into her basket again, pulled out a small leather Bible. This was my grandmother's. She carried it from Ireland. I'd be honored if you'd use it for the ceremony. Sarah, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly burst forward. Does this mean we're having a real wedding with flowers and cake and everything? If your mama wants, Martha said, smiling down at her. Though it might be a small one. Small's perfect, Abigail managed through her tears. Small and real in ours. Jonas moved then, Extending his hand to Martha, she took it without hesitation, her small hand disappearing in his massive one. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing us. Not many would." "More than you think," Martha replied. "Will Patterson spoke up for you both after the incident with Morrison. The Schmidt brothers, too. Once they sobered up and realized what fools they'd been. You have friends here, whether you know it or not." She bustled about then, in that way women had of making occasions out of ordinary moments. The dress was produced cream-colored and lovely, only slightly yellowed with age. Plans were made 2 days hence. At the church, if Josiah agreed. At the homestead, if not. Martha would bring food. The Olsons might come, and the Pattersons certainly would. "It won't be everyone," she warned. "Morrison's got his followers, and they'll be vocal. But the decent folks, the ones who matter, they'll stand with you." After she left, promising to return tomorrow with sewing supplies, the three of them stood in their suddenly transformed cabin. What had been a morning of difficult choices had become something else entirely. A celebration, a validation, a community, however small, choosing to support love over convention. "Did that just happen?" Jonas asked, looking stunned. "Did the preacher's wife just plan our wedding?" "She did." Abigail laughed, really laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Oh, Jonas, we're getting married." He caught her up, spun her around while Sarah danced and cheered. When he set her down, his face was serious again. "Are you sure, last chance to see sense? I'm still the mountain hermit, still the outsider. This won't change that." "You're our mountain hermit," Abigail corrected. "Our outsider, our Jonas, our choice." She reached up, touched his beloved face. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Then I guess we're getting married." He said it with wonder, like he couldn't quite believe the words. "I'm going to be your husband, Sarah's father, a family man." "The best family man," Sarah declared with absolute certainty. "Because you chose us, and we chose you, and that's stronger than anything." And standing there in their small cabin, with morning light streaming through windows Jonas had reinforced and curtains Abigail had sewn, they knew she was right. Choice was stronger than circumstance, love mightier than fear, and family was something you built with your own hands from whatever materials life provided. 2 days, in 2 days, they'd stand before God and whatever witnesses would come, and make official what was already true in their hearts. They were a family, odd, perhaps unexpected. Certainly, but theirs, absolutely and forever theirs. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with the kind of endless blue sky that made the Wyoming territory feel like God's own cathedral. Jonas had been up since before dawn, working with quiet intensity on something in the barn. Abigail found him there as the first rays of sunlight touched the prairie grass. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, though she'd barely slept herself. He turned, and her breath caught. He'd trimmed his beard, tamed his wild hair into something respectable. His clothes were simple but clean, the best he had, pressed with care. But it was the look in his eyes that stopped her heart. Joy and terror in equal measure. The expression of a man about to step off a cliff into unknown air. "Building something," he said, gesturing to his project. "Wanted it ready for today." It was a bench carved from a single massive log, smooth and beautiful. Along the back, he'd carved their names Jonas and Abigail Harrow, and below that, Sarah. The date followed, marking this day in wood that would last generations. "Oh, Jonas!" She ran her fingers over the letters. "It's perfect." Figured we should have something to mark it, something that'll stay when we're gone. So folks know a family lived here. A real family. The morning flew by in preparations. Martha Brewster arrived with 2 other women misses, Olson and, surprisingly, Emma Schmidt, whose husband had refused Jonas service. She came bearing apologies and a wedding gift of new curtains. "Hans was a fool," she said simply. "I told him so, Man saves a woman and child from freezing. He deserves respect, not judgment. They helped Abigail into Martha's mother's dress. It fit better than expected, as if waiting decades for this moment. Sarah danced around in her best dress, the one with only 2 patches, clutching a bouquet of early wildflowers she and Jonas had picked the day before. "You look like a princess, Mama," she breathed, like in the stories. "And you look like the finest flower girl in the territory," Abigail replied, adjusting Sarah's ribbon. Through the window, she could see men gathering in the yard. Will Patterson had come, bringing his 2 grown sons. The Olsen men were there, and even Hans Schmidt, looking sheepish but determined. Jonas stood among them, somehow apart even while surrounded, until Will clapped him on the shoulder and said something that made him smile. "Ready?" Martha asked. "Since the moment he walked through my door." Abigail answered. The ceremony was held in the yard, under the vast sky. Reverend Brewster had come, though Martha's persuasion had clearly been required. He stood stiffly at first, but as he opened his Bible and began to speak the ancient words, something in him seemed to remember why he'd taken up the calling in the first place. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here under God's heaven to join this man and this woman." Abigail barely heard the words. All she could see was Jonas, standing tall and solid as the mountains he'd come from, tears streaming unashamed down his weathered face. When it came time for vows, his voice broke. "Abigail, I came to you broken and bleeding, more beast than man. You saw something in me I'd forgotten existed. You gave me shelter not just from the storm, but from the loneliness that was killing me slowly as any wound." He paused, collected himself. "I vow to spend every day earning the gift you've given me, to protect and provide, to cherish and support, to be the man you and Sarah deserve. I promise to build our life bigger and stronger with each passing season, until our home is a beacon of what love can create in this wild land." Abigail's own vows came through tears. "Jonas, you say I saved you, but the truth is we saved each other. You brought strength when I had none left, joy when I'd forgotten its face. You showed my daughter that good men still exist, that families can be chosen and built from courage and commitment." She squeezed his hands. "I vow to stand beside you against whatever comes, to make our home a haven from the world's hardness, to love you with all the fierce devotion this prairie has taught me, to be yours, as you are mine, until the stars fall from the sky." "And I vow," Sarah piped up unexpectedly, "to be the best daughter and help with chores and only talk a little bit when Pa needs quiet, and to love you both forever and ever." Laughter rippled through the small gathering. Jonas reached down, lifted Sarah to his hip without missing a beat. "Then, by the power vested in me," Reverend Brewster said, smiling now despite himself, "I pronounce you husband and wife, and a family bound by choice and blessing. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Harrow." The kiss was gentle, appropriate for public viewing, but holding promises of deeper intimacy to come. The small crowd cheered, and suddenly the yard was full of congratulations and goodwill. But not everyone had come to celebrate. As the gathering moved toward the feast Martha had organized, Jake Morrison appeared on the ridge, accompanied by several rough-looking men. They didn't approach, just sat their horses watching, a dark reminder that not everyone wished them well. Jonas saw them too. Without a word, he handed Sarah to Abigail and walked to where his rifle leaned against the cabin wall. He didn't pick it up, just stood beside it, meeting Morrison's stare across the distance. The message was clear. "This is my land now, my family. Come if you dare." After a long moment, Morrison spat in the dirt and turned his horse. His followers reluctantly followed. The threat remained, but for today, it would not intrude. The celebration continued into evening. Tables were set with more food than they'd seen in months. Stories were shared. Toasts made with precious whiskey and home-brewed beer. Sarah fell asleep in Jonas's lap as the sun set, completely secure in her new father's arms. "Never thought I'd see this," Will Patterson said quietly to Jonas. You settled, married. It suits you. Never thought I'd see it either, Jonas admitted. Figured I'd die alone up in those mountains, forgotten by everyone including God. Maybe he didn't forget. Maybe he was just waiting for the right time. As the guests finally departed, full of food and goodwill, the new family stood together in their doorway. The cabin behind them was the same structure, but everything had changed. Jonas's belongings were fully integrated now, no longer a guest's possessions but part of the household. The new bench sat by the door, permanent as a promise. That night, after Sarah was tucked in bed, Jonas and Abigail sat by their fire. She wore her everyday dress again, but kept the wildflower crown Sarah had made. He'd removed his good jacket but still looked uncommonly civilized. Any regrets? She asked, though his peaceful expression already gave the answer. Only that I didn't find you sooner. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his shoulder. All those years in the mountains, I thought I was living, but I was just existing. Same as you said, this us, Sarah, this life we're building, this is living. It won't be easy. Morrison won't give up. There'll be others who think like him. Let them come. Jonas's arm tightened around her. I've fought bears and blizzards and my own demons. Small-minded men don't frighten me. Besides, he smiled, I've got something now I never had before. What's that? Something worth fighting for, someone to fight beside. He kissed the top of her head. We're bigger than their hatred. Abigail, our love, our family. It's bigger than anything they can throw at us. Summer came slow and sweet to their corner of Wyoming. Jonas proved as skilled with plow as with rifle, breaking new ground for expanded crops. The cabin grew to first the promised room for Sarah, then a proper addition that doubled their living space. With each beam raised, each wall completed. Jonas's promise was kept. They were building something bigger. The town's reaction remained mixed. Some, like the Pattersons and Schmidts, became true friends. Others kept their distance but were civil. Morrison and his ilk made trouble when they could, but Jonas's quiet strength and Abigail's fierce dignity proved unshakable. Sarah thrived. Growing like the sunflowers she planted with Jonas, she remained chattery and bright, but now had a deep well of security that came from being truly loved and protected. At the harvest dance, when someone muttered about that wild man's brat, Sarah herself responded, He's not wild. He's my PA, and we're bigger than your whole world. The phrase became their family motto, whispered in hard times, laughed over in good ones. When winter came again, it found them ready woodpile high, larder full, hearts warm with the kind of love that only grows stronger when tested. On the anniversary of Jonas's arrival, they sat in their expanded cabin, snow falling soft outside. Sarah played with a new carved toy, a whole family of horses now. Jonas worked on plans for a new barn come spring. Abigail mended clothes that were worn from use, not poverty. You're bigger than my whole world, she said suddenly, the words that had once made him cry now making him smile. And you're mine, he replied. You and Sarah both. My whole world, right here in this cabin. Sarah looked up from her horses. We're each other's worlds, she said with 5-year-old wisdom. That's what makes us a family. And in that moment, with snow whispering secrets against their strong walls and fire crackling in the hearth Jonas had reinforced, they knew the absolute truth of it. They'd built something bigger than loneliness, stronger than judgment, deeper than the prairie soil itself. They'd built a home. They'd chosen love. And in the vast wilderness of Wyoming territory, that was the greatest adventure of all. The mountain man, the widow, and the little girl who'd brought them together no longer 3 separate souls but one family, facing whatever came with the unshakable certainty that together they were bigger than any world that tried to make them small. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of frontier romance and resilience. Please comment below and let me know what country or city you're listening from so we can connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Jonas, Abigail, and little Sarah's journey. What part of their story touched your heart the most? Your comments mean the world to me.